In a quiet corner of the bustling city, there lived a man named Daniel. His days were filled with the rhythmic sound of his keyboard as he coded in the dim light of his office, the occasional laughter of his co-workers echoing down the hallway. Daniel was a programmer, meticulous and introverted, finding comfort in the predictable patterns of ones and zeros. His hair was perpetually ruffled from hours of deep thought, and his eyes held a constant glint of curiosity. His life was simple and structured, much like the code he wrote. At home, the atmosphere was warmer and more chaotic. His son, Ethan, bounced around the house, a whirlwind of energy and fascination with the world. Ethan was autistic, and his mother, Linda, was his rock, his anchor in the tumultuous sea of social interactions and sensory overload. She had a way of understanding him that Daniel could never quite grasp, a silent language that connected them in a way that was beautiful to witness. Daniel admired her strength and patience, but he often felt like he was just a bystander in Ethan's life. Ethan's obsession with technology began early, his eyes lighting up at the sight of a computer screen. As he grew older, his interest in the digital world deepened, and he started to show a remarkable talent for hacking. Linda was wary, but Daniel saw it as a gift, his way of connecting with his son. They spent hours together, Daniel guiding, Ethan through the labyrinth of coding challenges and online puzzles. It was the closest they had ever been, and Daniel cherished those moments. But the digital playground that Ethan loved so much had a darker side, one that Daniel had never explored. The deep web was a place of anonymity and danger, a realm where the worst of humanity could hide in plain sight. Despite his mother's warnings, Ethan's curiosity grew, and he began to venture into the murky waters of the dark web. Daniel tried to keep up, but the allure of the forbidden was too strong for his son. One day, Ethan stumbled upon something that would change their lives forever, a live stream of a young girl being held captive. His innocent eyes widened in horror, and he turned to his father for answers. Daniel, his heart racing, knew he had to protect Ethan from the monsters he had inadvertently uncovered. The father and son duo grew closer as they navigated the treacherous digital landscape, but Daniel could not keep the shadows at bay. The line between their world and the dark web blurred, and soon they found themselves entangled in a web of deceit and depravity that neither could comprehend. Ethan's curiosity became an obsession, and he spent every waking moment trying to unravel the mystery behind the live stream. Daniel watched helplessly as his son's bright mind was consumed by the very thing that was supposed to be their bond. The day the unthinkable happened was like any other. Ethan was in his room, the glow of the computer screen casting an eerie light on his face. Daniel was in the kitchen, trying to ignore the dread that had been gnawing at him for weeks. The knock on the door was unexpected, and the two men who claimed to be from the internet service provider were even more so. They said they needed to check the router, but the coldness in their eyes spoke of something far more sinister. The events that followed unfolded like a nightmare. Ethan was taken from his room, his mother's screams piercing the air. Daniel tried to fight, but he was no match for their strength and cruelty. The house was in disarray, the smell of fear and desperation thick in the air. And then the silence fell, leaving Daniel and Linda in a void of pain and despair. Days turned into weeks, and the hope of finding Ethan grew dimmer. The police were of little help, and the dark web remained an impenetrable fortress. Daniel turned to alcohol, seeking solace in the bottle to numb the pain of his failure. Linda's mental health deteriorated rapidly, her mind a tangled mess of guilt and anguish. One fateful evening, Daniel received a message from an anonymous account, a link to a live stream with the words "You're next" scrawled across it. With trembling hands, he clicked play. His heart stopped as he saw Ethan's terrified face on the screen. The room was cold and damp, the air thick with the smell of fear. His son was in the hands of the monsters he had been trying to expose, and now they had come for him. The screams that filled their home that night were not just from the computer speakers. They were a symphony of pain and loss, a haunting echo of what once was. Daniel knew he had lost Ethan, and with him the last piece of himself that was worth saving. In the cold, unforgiving light of the next morning, Daniel could not escape the reality of his son's fate. The emptiness in his heart grew with every passing minute, a gaping wound that no amount of alcohol could soothe. Linda's condition worsened, her mind a shattered mirror reflecting the horrors they had witnessed. The once vibrant woman who had been Ethan's anchor now floated through life, like a ghost trapped in the torment of her own thoughts. Daniel tried to help her, but his own guilt was a thick fog that clouded his judgment. He felt like he had failed his son, his wife, and himself. The world around them grew darker, and the house, once a sanctuary, became a prison of painful memories. The live stream played in an endless loop in Daniel's mind, the image of Ethan's pleading eyes etched into his soul. He knew he had to do something, anything to make it right. With a newfound determination fueled by grief and anger, he turned to the very thing that had stolen his son, the dark web. He vowed to navigate its twisted corridors and bring justice to those who had taken him. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel's obsession grew. His once structured life crumbled around him as he delved deeper into the digital underworld. He discovered a network of predators, each more vile than the last. The more he learned, the more he realized how powerless he truly was. But he could not stop, not until he found the ones responsible. His nights were spent in a haze of drunken rage, his days a blur of tears and despair. One evening, the house phone rang, a sound that had become as rare as hope in their lives. It was the hospital, informing him that Linda had had a psychotic break and needed to be admitted immediately. Daniel felt the last thread of his sanity snap. He knew he could not save her, not when he could not even save their son. With a heavy heart, he agreed to her institutionalization, feeling as though he was losing her too. Now, alone in the house that was once filled with laughter, Daniel faced the bleakness of his future. He knew that his son was gone, and that he could never fill the void left by his absence. The only thing left was to find the monsters and make them pay. The bottle of whiskey on the table called to him, promising an escape from the pain. But he knew that path led nowhere but down. Instead, he took a deep breath, his eyes focusing on the flickering screen of his computer. He had a new mission, a new purpose, to become the monster that stalks the monsters, and he would not rest until he had brought them all to justice. The house was eerily quiet, save for the clacking of his keyboard and the occasional whirl of the ceiling fan. Daniel's transformation had begun, and the digital world would soon feel his wrath. The whiskey remained untouched, a symbol of his past life now forgotten in his quest for vengeance. As he disappeared into the abyss of the dark web, he became a specter of retribution, a silent guardian of the innocent lost in the digital wilderness. His son's memory was his beacon, guiding him through the shadows. The months that followed were a blur of hacking and vigilantism. Daniel's skills grew sharper with each passing day, his thirst for vengeance fueling his every move. He infiltrated forums, exposed predators, and brought them to the attention of the authorities. Yet, the ones who had taken Ethan remained elusive, a phantom taunting him from the depths of the internet. One day, a message popped up on his encrypted chat. It was from someone claiming to be the one who had taken his son. Daniel's heart raced. As he read the cruel words, the sender daring him to find them, to play their twisted game. It was a challenge he could not resist. The cat-and-mouse chase led him through a labyrinth of encrypted servers and fake identities. His obsession grew, consuming him as he sacrificed his health and what little remained of his humanity. The line between justice and obsession grew thinner with every keystroke, until one day it was gone entirely. The final confrontation took place in a dingy apartment on the outskirts of the city. The stench of decay filled the air as Daniel stepped through the door, the echoes of his footsteps the only sound in the silent room. He had traced the digital footprints of the monsters to this forsaken place, driven by an unyielding rage that had become his constant companion. The walls were lined with screens, each showing a different scene of horror, a twisted gallery of innocence lost. His eyes searched the room, heart pounding like a drum in his chest. He entered the room to find nothing, the stench of decay lingering with a stinging sensation of bleach. The realization hit him like a sledgehammer. They had been watching him all along, playing him like a pawn in their sick game. His eyes fell upon a USB stick lying on the floor. A mocking grin etched into his mind as he realized it was their way of saying goodbye. The message was clear. They were untouchable, laughing at him from the safety of their digital fortress. The walls of the room closed in around him, the weight of his failure crushing him. Defeated and lost, Daniel stumbled home, the cold embrace of the night air offering no comfort. The whiskey bottle called out from the kitchen counter, a siren song of sweet oblivion. He knew he had nothing left to live for. The love of his life was gone, and his son's killers remained unpunished. He could not bear the thought of facing another day in a world that had taken everything from him. With trembling hands, he pulled out a piece of paper and a pen. The words flowed from his heart, an apology to Linda for his failure as a husband and a father. He wrote of his love for Ethan, the joy his son had brought into their lives, and the regret that now filled the void where their shared moments used to be. The letter was raw and painful, a confession of his inadequacies and the guilt that had eaten away at his soul. The whiskey called out to him, a siren's lullaby promising an end to the pain. He took one last swig, feeling the burn as it traveled down his throat. The bottle clinked against the floor, the sound echoing in the emptiness of the house. His gaze fell upon the knife on the counter, a silent witness to the despair that had claimed him. With a heavy sigh, he penned his final words to Linda. The B letter was a river of regret, a confession of his inability to save Ethan or to be the husband she deserved. Each stroke of the pen felt like a nail in his own coffin, a testament to his failure. When he was done, he set the paper down, his hand shaking from the weight of his sorrow. The whiskey bottle, once a symbol of refuge, now represented the emptiness in his soul. He took one last swig, feeling the warmth spread through his body, a final illusion of comfort before the cold reality set in. The room spun around him as he set the bottle down, the clinking sound of the glass against the wooden floorboards a mournful farewell. With trembling hands, Daniel picked up the knife. The metal felt cold against his skin, a stark contrast to the feverish heat of his grief. He had failed Linda, failed Ethan. In his drunken haze, he saw their faces, their accusatory eyes staring back at him from the blood-stained walls of his mind. It was time to pay the ultimate price for his inadequacies. He sliced through the flesh of his left wrist, the pain a momentary respite from the agony of his guilt. The crimson flow began, a river of regret that mirrored the one he had just poured onto the page. He watched it spread, feeling a strange sense of relief as the warmth of his lifeblood mingled with the coldness of the kitchen tiles. He took a deep breath and made the same cut on his right wrist, the room spinning as the alcohol and loss of blood took their toll. The world grew dimmer, the edges of his vision blurring like a photograph left out in the rain. He slumped to the floor, the knife slipping from his grasp, clattering against the tiles. The whiskey bottle stood sentinel beside him, a silent companion in his final moments. His thoughts grew fuzzy, the pain of his grief giving way to a numbing coldness that crept through his veins. The house remained still, a tomb of unspoken sorrow, as Daniel's life ebbed away. His breaths grew shallower, the world around him fading to black. The darkness was comforting, a stark contrast to the horrors that had become his reality. In those final moments, he saw Ethan's face, the light of innocence that had once shone so brightly. Upstairs, Linda's cries for Daniel went unanswered. Her mind, already fractured, could not comprehend the silence that had descended upon the house. She had lost her son, and now her husband was slipping away. Her sobs grew louder, the thud of her footsteps echoing through the halls as she searched for him. Her hand trembled as she opened the kitchen door, the scene before her a macabre painting of despair. On the floor lay Daniel, his lifeblood seeping into the cold tiles, the knife discarded beside him. The letter she found crumpled in his hand spoke of his love and regret, a confession that tore at her heart. Linda screamed, a sound that seemed to shatter the very walls of the house. The whiskey bottle, once a symbol of their bond, now a harbinger of destruction, stood tall in the corner, mocking her with its emptiness. Her eyes fell upon her son's photo on the fridge, the image of Ethan's smile a dagger to her soul. The room swirled around her, a kaleidoscope of pain. She dropped to her knees beside Daniel, his skin cold and clammy. She tried to stem the flow of blood, her own tears mixing with the crimson pool that surrounded them. But it was too late. He had left her alone in the abyss of their grief. The days that followed were a blur of funerals and condolences, the hollowness of their house a stark reminder of what they had lost. Linda's sanity began to unravel at the seams, the fabric of her reality frayed beyond repair. The whispers of guilt and despair grew louder, drowning out the comfort of well-meaning friends and family. The darkness that had consumed Daniel had now claimed her too. The nights were the worst, her dreams haunted by the live stream that had claimed her son's life. She would wake up screaming, only to find the house as empty as her heart. Her mind was a minefield of memories, each step a potential trigger for a new explosion of pain. The whispers grew, urging her to join Daniel, to find peace in oblivion. The house that had once been a fortress of love and safety was now a prison of torment. The walls whispered of her failure, the shadows hiding the monsters that had stolen her son. The silence was a constant scream, a reminder of the laughter that would never fill the halls again. Linda's mind fragmented, unable to process the weight of her grief. She was lost in a sea of madness, adrift without an anchor. Her descent was swift, her grip on reality slipping away with each passing day. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. One fateful night, as the moon cast a cold light through the windows, she could bear it no more. She picked up the knife, her hand trembling with the echoes of Daniel's final moments. But as she held it to her wrist, she saw Ethan's eyes in the reflection of the blade, a silent plea to survive. With a strength she did not know she had, Linda put the knife down and allowed herself to be swallowed by the darkness. But as she fell, she made a promise to her son, a vow to live for the both of them. The whispers grew faint, the house's hold on her loosening as she embraced the only thing left to her, hope. The whispers of the dark web haunted her dreams, taunting her with the faces of those who had taken Ethan. But Linda was not the same woman who had lost her son. She was a mother transformed by loss and rage. With Daniel's letter clutched in her hand, she made her way to the computer, her trembling fingers hovering over the keys. She had watched her husband's descent into obsession, but she knew that she had to find a way to turn their tragedy into something more than just a sad story. The screen flickered to life, the glow casting an eerie pallor over her face. She knew the path ahead was fraught with danger, but she had nothing left to lose. With a deep breath, she stepped into the digital abyss, determined to become the hunter rather than the hunted. Her eyes hardened with resolve, she began her own quest for justice, her son's memory guiding her through the labyrinth of the dark web. The house that had once been a tomb of despair now buzzed with a new energy, a silent battle raging in the glow of the computer screens. Linda's transformation was complete. She had become a digital vigilante, a guardian of lost souls in the endless sea of cyberspace. Her mind raced, piecing together clues and tracking the monsters that lurked in the shadows. Each keystroke brought her closer to her son, to the truth of his stolen life.